You know what's crazy? I was sitting there watching NBA Today yesterday afternoon, just kind of half paying attention while I was doing some other stuff, and then suddenly the panel started talking about the Knicks, and I immediately stopped everything I was doing, because the way they were breaking it down, the way the insider information was flowing, it became crystal clear that we're about to see history repeat itself in New York. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, the Knicks are doing that thing again where they've been quietly circling a player for months, maybe even years, and now all the dominoes are finally lining up for them to actually pull the trigger. The player we're talking about? Nick Richards. And before you roll your eyes and think, oh great, another backup center rumor, let me tell you why. What I watched on NBA Today yesterday has me genuinely convinced this is actually happening this time. So, here's how the whole conversation started on the show. And honestly, it caught me completely off guard because I wasn't expecting them to dive this deep into the Knicks front office strategy. The panel, and you know, they've got sources embedded everywhere, from team executives to agents to players themselves. They started laying out this entire timeline of how long the Knicks have been pursuing Nick Richards. We're not talking about a recent development here. We're talking about a multi-year reconnaissance mission that the Knicks front office has been conducting on this guy, and the level of detail they provided on the show was absolutely fascinating. Hey, what's up everyone? 1 second before we dive in. That like button right there? Hit it now. Takes literally 1 second, but makes a massive difference in growing this channel and reaching more fans. Just smash that like real quick. Every like pushes this video further, so do me that favor right now. They went all the way back to September 2024, right after the Knicks had pulled off that blockbuster trade for Karl Anthony Towns and suddenly found themselves in a situation where their big man depth had been completely gutted. The reporting they referenced on NBA Today showed that immediately after acquiring KA, the Knicks front office started making calls about 3 specific centers: Nick Richards, Walker Kessler, and Robert Williams. These weren't casual inquiries either. These were serious discussions about how the Knicks could add legitimate big man depth to support Towns and Mitchell Robinson going forward. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is what the NBA Today crew really emphasized. The Knicks' interest in Richards didn't start in September 2024. It didn't even start that summer. According to the reporting they discussed on the show, the Knicks had Richards on their radar going back even further, back when they still had Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo on the roster. We're talking about sustained, long-term interest spanning multiple front office regimes, multiple roster configurations, multiple strategic directions for the franchise. That level of consistency in targeting a player tells you something significant. It tells you the Knicks genuinely believe Richards can be a valuable piece for them, regardless of how the rest of the roster is constructed. Now, before I get into the specific trade scenarios that the panel was breaking down, because trust me, they got into some really creative trade mechanics that could actually work, let me explain why Nick Richards has been on the Knicks' radar for so long and why this makes sense from a basketball perspective. The show really dove deep into what Richards brings to the table and why he's such a good fit for what the Knicks need. First off, Richards is a legitimate 7-footer. In today's NBA, where everybody's going small, where teams are playing 4 guards and a power forward at center, having an actual traditional big man who can protect the rim and control the paint is becoming increasingly valuable. The Knicks already have Karl Anthony Towns, who's more of a stretch 5, a guy who operates on the perimeter, shoots threes, spaces the floor. That's great offensively, but it creates defensive vulnerabilities, especially against teams with traditional dominant big men. Richards gives you that rim protection, that physical presence in the paint that Towns doesn't provide. The panel on NBA Today really broke down Richards' skill set in detail, and it's more impressive than most people realize. He can block shots, not at an elite Rudy Gobert level, but he's a legitimate deterrent at the rim. He can score around the basket, which sounds basic, but it's actually crucial for a backup center because you need somebody who can finish when your stars create opportunities. He's an excellent lob threat, which is huge in Tom Thibodeau's system, where they run a lot of pick-and-roll action. He sets solid screens, which might be the most underrated skill in basketball because good screens create open shots for your guards and wings. And perhaps most importantly, something the show really emphasized, Richards is still just 27 years old and in the absolute prime of his athletic ability. He's not some washed veteran on his last legs trying to catch a ring. He's a guy who should be entering the best years of his career. And the reason he's available is more about fit and opportunity in Phoenix than anything to do with his actual ability to play basketball at a high level. So now let's talk about the Phoenix situation, because understanding why the Suns are motivated to move Richards is crucial to understanding why this trade actually makes sense for all parties involved. The NBA Today panel got really deep into the salary cap mechanics here, and I'm going to try to break it down as clearly as they did, because it's actually fascinating how these things work. Phoenix is currently about $300,000 over the luxury tax threshold. Now, $300,000 might not sound like much when we're talking about NBA money, but because of the way the new CBA is structured with the luxury tax and the repeater penalties and the second apron restrictions, that $300,000 could end up costing the Suns ownership tens of millions in tax payments if they don't get under the threshold before the deadline. It's not just about the $300,000, it's about avoiding the cascading penalties that come with being a tax-paying team. So the Suns are actively shopping Nick Richards. And according to the reporting that NBA Today referenced from Brian Windhorst and Bobby Marks, Phoenix specifically needs to swap Richards for a player making $4.7 million or less. That's the magic number. If they can do that, they drop under the tax, they avoid all the penalties, and they save ownership a fortune. On top of that, trading Richards opens up minutes for Cameron Malawach, their young big man who they've been wanting to develop. And it also solidifies Mark Williams' role as the undisputed starting center. The show mentioned that multiple teams have already reached out to Phoenix about Richards, specifically naming the Celtics, Knicks, Nuggets, and Raptors as teams that have checked in. But here's what makes the Knicks situation unique and why the panel kept coming back to them as the most likely landing spot. The Knicks have the perfect combination of need, assets, and salary matching capability to actually get a deal done. Let's talk about the Knicks' big man situation, because the panel really dissected this, and it revealed some concerning trends that I don't think casual fans fully appreciate. Karl Anthony Towns has been struggling significantly recently. Not just having a few bad games, we're talking about a sustained stretch of subpar performance that has people questioning whether the trade for him was even worth it. Towns is supposed to be the guy, the franchise centerpiece, but he's been inconsistent defensively. He's been passive offensively at times, and his body language has been concerning. Mitchell Robinson is great when healthy, but, and this is something NBA Today really emphasized, Robinson has become one of the most injury-prone players in the league. You cannot count on him being available for a playoff run. The Knicks learned that lesson the hard way last season. You need insurance. You need depth. You need somebody who can step in when Robinson inevitably misses time. Then you've got guys like Jericho Sims, who has been disappointing this season and hasn't given the Knicks the production they need. Ariel Hukporti is more of a developmental piece than a guy you can rely on in meaningful playoff minutes. Trey Jemison is on a two-way contract, so his availability is extremely limited. When you look at the full picture, the Knicks' big man depth is actually pretty frightening for a team with championship aspiration. This is where Richards becomes so valuable. He's not going to be your starter. He's not going to play 35 minutes a night, but he's a rock-solid third-string center who can play 15 to 20 minutes when called upon without completely killing you. For a team like the Knicks that's trying to survive the regular season and then make a deep playoff run, having that kind of reliable depth is absolutely crucial. Now, here's where the NBA Today panel got really creative with the trade proposal. And honestly, this is where I got most excited watching the show, because they weren't just throwing out generic player-for-player ideas. They were actually constructing realistic trade frameworks that work under the salary cap and make sense for all parties involved. The basic framework they outlined was this. The Knicks send Precious Achiuwa to Phoenix. in exchange for Nick Richards. Salary-wise, it works perfectly. Achiuwa makes about $6 million, Richards makes about $5 million, Phoenix gets under the tax, the Knicks get their big man depth. Simple, clean, effective. But then they started layering in additional complexity that could make the deal even better for the Knicks. And this is where things got really interesting. They brought up Oso Ighodaro, who's this young forward on Phoenix's roster who was actually teammates with Tyler Kolek back in their college days. Ighodaro has been in and out of the Suns' rotation, showing some flashes but never really getting consistent opportunities because Phoenix is so deep on the wing. The panel floated this expanded version of the trade where the Knicks acquire both Richards and Ighodaro, sending back Achiuwa and potentially a second-round pick or two to make the money work and to give Phoenix some draft compensation. For the Knicks, this is brilliant because you're not just addressing your center depth, you're also adding a young, athletic wing who can provide versatility and who already has chemistry with one of your young players in Kolek. They really broke down on the show why Ighodaro could be a sneaky good addition for the Knicks. He's 6'9", with a 7'2" wingspan. He can guard multiple positions. He's an excellent cutter and off-ball mover, which fits perfectly in Thibodeau's system. And he's still on a rookie contract, which means he's essentially free from a salary cap perspective. The reunion with Kolek is just icing on the cake. Having guys who already have chemistry and know each other's games can accelerate the integration process when you're adding new players mid-season. The salary cap mechanics on this expanded trade get a little tricky, and the NBA Today panel really got into the weeds on this part. The Knicks are operating dangerously close to the second apron, which limits what they can do in terms of aggregating salaries and trades. But this particular deal actually helps them create a tiny bit of breathing room because they're sending out slightly more money than they're taking back, and that flexibility could be crucial if they want to make additional moves before the deadline. Phoenix, on their end, would be getting Precious Achiuwa, who's a young, energetic big man with versatility. He can play the 4 or the 5. He's got some switchability on defense, and he's the kind of high-motor player that could thrive in a different system with more opportunities. The panel discussed how Phoenix could potentially flip Achiuwa again for additional assets if they wanted to. He's the kind of player who has trade value across the league because of his age and athleticism. But here's the really clever part that the show brought up. If Phoenix doesn't want to keep Achiuwa long-term, they could easily package him with a second-round pick they received from the Knicks and flip him to another team for additional draft capital. We're talking about turning Richards and Ighodaro, two guys who aren't really part of their future plans, into potentially 3 or 4 second-round picks when you add it all up. For a team like Phoenix that's trying to maximize assets while staying competitive, that's actually a pretty smart move. Now, the panel also got into the Knicks' bigger picture strategy, and this is where the conversation expanded beyond just Nick Richards into the Knicks' overall trade deadline approach. They mentioned that, according to Ian Begley's reporting, the Knicks are still very interested in Jose Alvarado from New Orleans, and that Precious Achiuwa is still expected to be moved before the deadline, regardless of whether it's in a Richards deal or something else. The Alvarado stuff is fascinating because he represents a completely different type of addition than Richards. Alvarado is this undersized but absolutely tenacious defensive guard who can run your offense, who has playoff experience, and who, importantly, is from New York, which always matters to Knicks fans and the organization. The show discussed how Alvarado would give the Knicks another playmaker and perimeter defender, which are areas of need, even if they're not as glaring as the big man depth issue. But here's the tension they identified. If the Knicks trade for Alvarado, it potentially cuts into Tyler Kolek's minutes and development. Kolek has shown real promise this season in limited opportunities, and the front office apparently views him as part of the future. So do you sacrifice his development time to add a veteran like Alvarado who can help you now? That's the kind of calculation that championship-caliber organizations have to make. The panel's general consensus seemed to be that the Knicks should prioritize the Richards trade first because big man depth is the more pressing need, and then evaluate the Alvarado situation afterward, depending on what other assets they have available. You don't want to use up all your trade chips on a backup point guard when your center depth is literally one Mitchell Robinson injury away from being catastrophic. One thing NBA Today really emphasized that I thought was crucial is that the Knicks are in this weird position where they're simultaneously contending for a championship right now while also trying to preserve some level of flexibility for the future. They can't go completely all in and mortgage every single asset, but they also can't afford to be overly conservative when they've got Jalen Brunson in his prime and a roster that's legitimately good enough to win it all if everything breaks right. That's why a trade like Richards makes so much sense. You're giving up precious Achiuwa, who's a nice player but not a core piece. Maybe a couple of second-round picks that realistically weren't going to turn into anything meaningful anyway, and in return, you're getting legitimate playoff-caliber depth at a position of critical need. It's not a blockbuster move that's going to dominate headlines, but it's exactly the kind of smart, calculated roster upgrade that separates good teams from championship teams. The show also discussed how Nick Richards being from New York originally could actually matter in terms of his comfort level and motivation playing for the Knicks. There's something to be said for guys who grew up in the area, who understand the pressure and the media scrutiny, who have family and friends who will be at every home game. Richards wouldn't be coming to New York wide-eyed and overwhelmed. He'd be coming home, and that familiarity can help players adjust faster and perform better. What really stuck with me from the NBA Today segment was the sense of inevitability around this trade. The panel wasn't discussing it as, could this happen? Or, might this happen? They were talking about it as, when this happens, here's what it means. The reporting, the sources, the salary cap mechanics, the team motivations, everything is aligned for this deal to actually get done before the February 6th deadline. Phoenix needs to dump salary and get under the tax. The Knicks need big man depth desperately. The salaries match almost perfectly. Both teams have secondary motivations, Phoenix developing Malawach, the Knicks potentially adding Iguodaro, that make the deal even more appealing. There aren't significant roadblocks preventing this from happening, which is rare in NBA trade negotiations where usually there's some sticking point that derails deals. The panel also touched on the broader implications of what a Richards trade would mean for the Knicks' championship odds. Right now, the Knicks are viewed as a solid second-tier contender in the East, clearly behind Boston, maybe a step behind Cleveland and Milwaukee depending on how you evaluate things. But if they can shore up their big man depth, if they can ensure they have reliable players who can step in when injuries inevitably happen during a playoff run, they move into that top tier of contenders. Think about what the Knicks' playoff rotation would look like with Richards in the mix. You've got Brunson, Anunoby, Bridges, Towns, and Robinson as your starting five. Then off the bench, you've got guys like Josh Hart, Dante DiVincenzo, Miles McBride, and now Nick Richards, providing 20 quality minutes per game at center. That's a 9 or 10-man rotation, where you trust everybody, where there are no complete liabilities, where you can survive injuries and foul trouble without falling apart. That's what championship teams look like. The financial implications are also worth considering, something the show touched on briefly, but I think deserves more attention. Richards is on a very reasonable contract through next season, which means if this works out and he becomes a valuable piece, the Knicks have him locked up at below market value. If it doesn't work out, he's easy enough to move again because his salary is so manageable. There's very little downside risk here from a financial perspective, which makes pulling the trigger on the trade that much easier. One more thing the NBA Today panel mentioned that really caught my attention: the possibility that this Richards trade is just the beginning of a more active trade deadline for the Knicks. If they can get Richards done early, maybe in the next few days, that gives them 2 or 3 more weeks to explore other upgrades. Maybe they do circle back to Alvarado. Maybe they look at wing depth. Maybe they make a surprise move for a player nobody's even talking about yet. The Knicks have been operating with this patient, calculated approach under Leon Rose's leadership, waiting for the right opportunity, rather than forcing moves just to make headlines. But when those opportunities present themselves, and the Richards situation definitely qualifies as one of those opportunities, they strike quickly and decisively. We saw it with the OG Anunoby trade, We saw it with the Mikal Bridges trade, and we're probably about to see it again with Richards. The clock is ticking. We're less than 3 weeks from the trade deadline. Phoenix needs to get under the tax. The Knicks need big man depth. All the reporting suggests both teams are motivated to get something done. The salary matching works. The basketball fit makes sense. The timing is perfect. This is one of those situations where you can see the deal coming from a mile away. And after watching NBA Today yesterday, I'm more convinced than ever that it's actually happening. Not might happen or could happen. It's happening. The Knicks are getting Nick Richards. And probably Oso Ighodaro too, if they're smart about how they structure the trade. It's happening again. The Knicks are making that smart, under-the-radar move that doesn't grab massive headlines, but meaningfully improves the roster. They're addressing a clear need without sacrificing their future or gutting their core. They're operating like a well-run organization that understands how to build championship-caliber depth. We'll see how it all plays out over the next few weeks, but mark my words, when February 6th rolls around and the trade deadline passes, Nick Richards is going to be wearing a Knicks uniform. Everything I saw on NBA Today yesterday confirmed it. This isn't speculation anymore. This is inevitability. And honestly, it's the exact kind of move the Knicks need to make if they're serious about competing for a championship this season.